Hey everybody, welcome back to the Wolf Pit. You ever wonder how to feed a crowd and not spend a lot of money or waste a lot of time, but you still want to serve something delicious and filling? Then you serve sandwiches, of course. So in this video, I've thrown together 12 of my favorite sandwiches that are really easy to make, don't cost a lot of money, and will feed a crowd. And most of all, they're all delicious. So grab a frosty beverage, sit back, and relax, and tell me which one you think would be your favorite sandwich. Or better yet, if you've ever tried any of these sandwiches, let me know. Today I'm going to make Guinness Stout braised corned beef that simply falls apart into pulled corned beef. Then we're going to turn this melt in your mouth, tender and rich corned beef into the best Reubens you've ever had. It's really easy to make and delicious. So let's get started. I'm using a typical store-bought 4-pound corned beef brisket flat today, but this recipe can be done with a point cut too, which in my opinion has more flavor than the flat to begin with. If you can wait until after St. Patty's Day, you can also find corned beef on sale dirt cheap, compared to the astronomical $5.99 a pound I paid for this one. Now remove the corned beef from the packaging and save the seasoning packet, and then pat dry with paper towels. And now I'm going to sear the corned beef in a large skillet over medium-high heat with a little bit of vegetable oil. This step is totally optional, but it does add more flavor to the finished product. And you just want to brown it for 4 to 5 minutes on both sides, and don't forget the sides of the corned beef as well. The more caramelization you add, the more flavor you add. For a full printable copy of this recipe and more corned beef recipes, visit thewolfpit.com. Once the corned beef is browned on all sides, I've transferred it to a casserole dish since my skillet wasn't big enough for the meat and the braising liquid. Then I'm adding the contents of the seasoning packet that comes with the corned beef, along with some additional pickling spice. I'll strain the liquid after the corned beef is done, but if you have cheesecloth, you can simply wrap everything into it and save the straining step. Next I'm adding granulated onion, garlic, and lots of black pepper. Last but not least, for the braising liquid, I'm adding Guinness Extra Stout. I know I'm going to have people that don't drink or use alcohol in their food. If you don't want to use the stout as the braising liquid, believe it or not, you can use leftover black coffee or any kind of cola soda will work as long as it's not diet. But keep in mind, if you do use soda, it's going to leave a sweet taste to the corned beef. That's either a good or a bad thing, depending on your taste. Now tightly wrap it in aluminum foil and place it into a preheated 350-degree oven for 2.5 to 3 hours. After 2 hours, I pulled it out of the oven and checked for tenderness with 2 forks, and as you can tell, it's still pretty tough. So I flipped it over, rewrapped it, and put it back into the oven at 350 degrees for another hour. Those 3 hours had to be the longest, most miserable 3 hours I've had in a long time. The aroma throughout the house was simply incredible. But after the long 3 hours, the corned beef finally gave up. And like you've heard me say before with roasts, if you can stick a fork in them and they twist like spaghetti, they're done. Now remove the corned beef from the casserole dish and strain the braising liquid. Then return the corned beef to the casserole dish, take 2 forks and pull it apart just like you would pulled pork. And remove and discard any excess fat. At this point, I almost took a knife and ran it through the meat to chop it up into smaller pieces because I thought it would be stringy. But after tasting several pieces, it melted in your mouth, and there was no need to chop it up. Now once all the corned beef is pulled, the excess fat is removed, and the sauce has been strained, add the sauce back into the corned beef and give it one last mix. Now at this point, you can act like a caveman and eat it by the handfuls like I was trying to do until my wife stopped me, or you can make Reuben sandwiches, which is what we're going to do now. My original plan was to make a Reuben sandwich that resembled a pulled pork sandwich. I just wanted to do something different than your average Reuben sandwich. The pulled corned beef in place of the pulled pork, the sauerkraut in place of the coleslaw, the Russian dressing in place of the barbecue sauce. I looked for some sort of rye roll or even a rye bagel for over a week, and nobody makes them. You guys know me, I don't bake and I hate everything about baking. But to make this the way I wanted to, I decided to make rye Kaiser rolls. 3 hours later, I confirmed every single reason I ever had not to ever bake again. These rolls were beyond fail. So I picked up some hearty everything bagels and a loaf of classic rye bread. I toasted the bagels in some butter, and then added a mountain of the pulled corned beef,
And this doesn't just heat the corned beef through, but it browns the bottom of the corned beef just enough to give it a little bit more flavor. Now add some sauerkraut, and you can add as little or as much sauerkraut as you like. I love sauerkraut, so I'm adding a lot. Top that off with Swiss cheese. Add a lid until the corned beef and sauerkraut are heated through and the cheese is melted. One Reuben down, one to go. And now for a more traditional toasted Reuben. A nice fresh piece of rye bread, toasting in butter. Add lots of corned beef. Followed by Swiss cheese. Lots of sauerkraut. And of course, another piece of rye bread. Give it a flip and let it toast until the cheese is melted. And then top them both with Russian dressing. And for some reason, Russian dressing is pretty hard to find around here. Ken's Steakhouse is the only one I could find, which is good, but if you can't find it, just use Thousand Island, or even better yet, deli mustard. Cut them both in half, and then serve them with a nice fresh kosher dill pickle, which I did have, but I forgot to put on the cutting board. And there you have it, Guinness Stout braised pulled corned beef Reubens done two ways. I really thought I would like the Reuben on the bagel better because it was different, but the Reuben on rye with caraway seeds was the winner for me. Today I'm making smoked barbecue oxtails. For those of you not familiar with oxtails, they're not oxtails at all. They're cattle tails, like from a cow or a steer. Oxtail is simply the culinary term for cow tails. Why they don't call them cow tails, I don't know. If you've never had oxtails, you definitely want to give them a try. Oxtails have a lot of fat, which makes the meat succulent, melt in your mouth tender, and mouth-watering delicious. So let's get started and get these in the smoker. I have about 5 pounds of oxtails that I'm going to very generously season with Wolf Rub Bold Barbecue Seasoning. You can use your favorite barbecue rub, or salt and pepper and garlic, or whatever combination you like. Now toss them around and make sure all sides are coated. Now you can put these on the smoker right now, or you can put them in the fridge for a couple hours, or even up to overnight. I'm going to put them in the fridge for a couple hours. After chilling out in the fridge for a couple hours, the oxtails are ready for the smoker. I have my grill preheated to 250 degrees, and I'm using cherry wood for smoke. Now close the lid and let these smoke for 2 to 3 hours at 250 degrees. Now here they are after smoking for 2 hours, and they don't quite have the color or texture I want yet, so I'm going to close the lid and let them smoke for another hour. Now here they are after smoking for 3 hours, and boy do they look and smell good. But they're not yet tender yet, so I'm going to wrap the pan in aluminum foil and let them braise in their own fat and juices for another hour and a half to 2 hours or until tender. After smoking for 3 hours and braising for 2, for a total cook time of 5 hours, our oxtails are done. If you'd like a full printable copy of this recipe and many more barbecue recipes, visit thewolfpit.com. Now using a fork or your fingers, if you want to burn your fingers off, start pulling the meat apart and removing the bones and any excess fat. Now I'm a really big fan of barbecue pulled beef to begin with, but this smoked barbecued oxtail is absolutely amazing. First of all, the meat is succulent and rich, not to mention absolutely delicious. But the texture of the meat is what's blowing me away. It literally melts in your mouth. No teeth are required. So when you make this, invite your grandparents over for dinner. Now pile it high on a nice toasted onion roll, Kaiser roll, hamburger roll, white bread. I don't care what you put it on, just eat it. Now I'm going to top it with my thick and chunky and absolutely delicious homemade bacon bourbon barbecue sauce. Now if you want the recipe for the bacon bourbon barbecue sauce, stay tuned. The video will be coming up soon. And there you have it. smoked barbecue oxtail on a toasted onion roll with bacon bourbon barbecue sauce. Now smash it down, dislocate your jaw, and take a big old bite. Like I said before, I was already a huge fan of barbecue beef to begin with, but this is by far the best barbecue beef I've ever made or ever had. And I gotta give kudos to the bacon bourbon barbecue sauce. It was the perfect barbecue sauce for this sandwich.
Today I'm making moist and tender, sweet and tangy, pulled barbecue chicken with chicken bacon. Well, maybe it's not really bacon, but I'll call it chicken bacon. So let's get started. I'm going to start by preheating my Rectech to 250 degrees. Now for the smoke today, I'm using a mixture of apple, cherry, hickory, and maple pellets. And now I'm going to add unseasoned chicken leg quarters. You can use any part of the chicken you like, or even a couple of whole chickens, but I find that dark meat chicken works the best. And now I'm going to close the lid and let this smoke for about 2.5 to 3 hours, or until the chicken is fork tender. After slow smoking for 3 hours, our chicken is beautifully tanned. Now I'm going to pull the chicken and let it rest for about 30 minutes. Skin on slow smoked poultry is usually rubbery and inedible, but I'm going to turn this into what I'm going to call chicken bacon. So I'm going to remove all the skin and set it aside. Once all the skin is removed, I'm going to start pulling all the meat off the bone and discarding the bones and pulling the meat into bite-sized pieces. And the reason I like leaving the chicken into chunks like this is because it keeps its texture. It doesn't become mushy, stringy chicken once it's reheated in the sauce. Once all the chicken is pulled and the skin and bones are removed, you can season the chicken and eat it as is, or you can sauce it like I'm going to. Or you can use it for chicken salad, tacos, burritos, anything you want. You have chicken here that you can use for just about anything. And now I'm going to take the smoked chicken skin and cut it into strips. At this point, because the chicken was slow smoked, the skin is rubbery and inedible. But I'm going to cut it into strips and turn it into something delicious and crispy. And now I'm going to add a little vegetable oil to a skillet over medium-high heat. And now I'm adding the smoked chicken skin, and I'm going to let it fry for about 5 to 6 minutes or until all the fat is rendered and the skin is crisp. After frying for about 5.5 minutes, our smoked chicken skin has rendered all the fat and it's nice and crispy. Now I'm going to drain it on paper towels. And now I'm going to liberally season with salt and pepper. And there you have it, quasi chicken bacon. And now let's add some spice and flavor to this chicken. I'm going to add some Wolf Rub Original barbecue seasoning and some barbecue sauce. You can use whatever kind of barbecue sauce or rub you like. This is just store-bought barbecue sauce. I have my heat on medium-low, and now I'm going to give it a mix until everything's well combined and heat it through. You don't want to overcook it at this point. The chicken is already cooked, so you just want to make it warm enough to eat. After warming through for about 5 minutes, the smoked barbecue chicken is ready. Now after you've added a big old pile of barbecue chicken to your bun, top that off with a crispy, smoky chicken bacon. And there you have it, smoked barbecue pulled chicken with crispy, smoky chicken bacon.
Today I'm going to be making a classic New Orleans roast beef po' boy, just like they make them at the Parasol Restaurant and Bar in New Orleans. I was watching Triple D the other day, or Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives, and saw this being made and said, I gotta have this. So let's get started and make this classic New Orleans roast beef po' boy. I'm going to make one change to the recipe right off the bat. They use a round roast for the roast beef. Top or bottom, it doesn't matter. There's no fat, which means no flavor. So I'm going to use a chuck roast, which does have fat and flavor. Now fill the pot with water until it covers the roast by about an inch. Now are you ready for this? That's all you put in the pot. No seasonings, just water. But you gotta trust me and stick with me. It all works out in the end, and it's very delicious. Now bring it to a boil, reduce the heat to medium-low, cover, and let it simmer for an hour and a half to 2 hours, just until it's cooked through. You're not trying to cook it until it's tender. Now let's make a faux roux. And no, I'm not talking about a fake kangaroo, I'm talking about a roux, which is equal parts fat and flour mixed together and cooked together. This is not cooked, so that's why I'm calling it a faux roux. I could have just said we're making a thickener for the gravy, but that wouldn't have been nearly as funny as talking about a fake kangaroo. That's definitely a wolf pit first. I've never talked about a kangaroo on this channel. So in a large bowl, add all-purpose flour, black pepper, granulated garlic, kosher salt, vegetable oil, and kitchen bouquet. Now give it all a good mix until everything is well combined. Once you have a bowl full of what looks like clumps of mud from the bottom of your shoe, it's done. Now set this aside until you're ready to make the gravy. Now here's what the chuck roast will look like after 2 hours. Now remove it from the pot, reserve 5 cups of the liquid, and let the meat cool. Here's the chuck roast after it's drained and cooled, and it is definitely not the most appetizing thing you want to see. But again, it does get better. Now slice it against the grain, and it doesn't really matter how thick or how thin you slice. If you'd like a full printable copy of this recipe and many more, visit thewolfpit.com. Now this is just a matter of preference. If you want to trim all the excess fat and discard it, that's fine. But I like fat, so I'm going to leave it in. Now add 5 cups of broth back into the pot and bring it to a boil. And then add your ball of mud. Faux roux. Gravy thickener, that's right. But it's not only a thickener to the gravy, it's going to add flavor and color. Break it apart and whisk it in. And it should start to thicken up in about 1 or 2 minutes. If it gets too thick, add a little bit more broth. At this point, don't worry about the little lumps in the gravy. Once the meat is done, the lumps will be gone. Then add all the meat back to the pot. Now give it a good mix until all the meat is covered with the gravy. Now the parasol put the meat and gravy in a pan covered with foil and finished in the oven. At this point, I don't think it really matters whether you finish it in the oven or on the stovetop. The stovetop is easier for me, so I'm going to cover, reduce the heat to low, and let it simmer for an hour and a half to 2 hours until the meat is falling apart. Now here's the meat after simmering for 2 hours, and at this point, I was ready to forego the sandwich and get a fork and just eat the meat by itself. It not only smells good, but does it look good or what? It's got to be the fake kangaroo, faux roux, gravy thickener that makes it look so good. Here's a whole loaf of French bread, and French bread is absolutely mandatory. A po' boy literally is not a po' boy without French bread. Now I'm going to cut the loaf of French bread in 3 pieces. Now slather a very generous amount of mayonnaise on each piece of bread. Stop it. To whoever's saying, "It would be so much better if he toasted the bread," stop being so impatient. Just wait for the sandwich to be finished. Once you've slathered on an artery-clogging amount of mayonnaise, add the meat. And don't just add a little bit of meat, add a Hungry Jack amount of meat. That way you don't have to sing the song, "Hungry, Hungry Jack," to gobble 'em down and the plate comes back for Hungry Jack. For my own sanity, I hope some of you remember that commercial. Once you've added a Hungry Jack amount of meat on the bottom of the bread, let's add the toppings on the top. Let's start with a layer of dill pickles, a layer of homegrown hot house store-bought tomatoes, and a couple handfuls of shredded iceberg lettuce. Now things really get bizarre. You place the whole sandwich in a 400-degree oven for about 5 to 7 minutes to toast the bread. At this point, I was thinking I cannot wait to eat hot lettuce and the hot tomatoes. But I hung in there and cooked it just like it's supposed to be cooked. And here it is all nice and toasted after 7 minutes in a 400-degree oven. And there you have it, a Nolan's classic, roast beef po' boy. And like I said earlier, I thought toasting the whole sandwich with lettuce and tomato after it was made was really bizarre. Even though the lettuce and tomato were a little bit soggy after being baked, it all worked, came together and was absolutely delicious. And in just a couple seconds, you're going to see why they also call it a sloppy roast beef po' boy. The Colonel's finger-licking chicken ain't got nothing on this po' boy.
Today I'm doing a Wolf Pit signature recipe, pepper stout beef. You may have seen me do it before on other grills, but today I'm doing it on the Rectech pellet smoker. It's smoky, it's spicy, it's tender, and it's delicious. So let's get started. I'm going to start with a 5-pound boneless chuck roast, and I'm going to coat it liberally with Worcestershire sauce. And then a very generous coating of kosher salt, and this may look like a lot of salt, but it's a pretty big roast. Followed by an equally generous coating of black pepper. And now continue this process until the whole roast is coated. Once all sides of the roast are seasoned, it's ready for the smoker. I have the Rectech preheated to 250 degrees. Now I'm going to smoke the roast until it gets to 165 degrees internally, or until it has a nice color and bark to it. After 2 hours, it's looking pretty good, but it doesn't quite have the color I want, so I'm going to let it go for 30 more minutes. Now while the roast continues to smoke, let's put the rest of our ingredients together. We have bell pepper, red onion, fresh garlic, Worcestershire sauce, or whatever you want to call it, and the key ingredient, Guinness Extra Stout. For a full printable copy of this recipe and many more, visit the Wolf Pit blog. Now just give everything a thorough mix. I forgot to mention, my original pepper stout beef recipe has jalapenos in it, but the crowd I'm feeding today doesn't like spicy, so I left them out. After 2.5 hours, the chuck roast is only at 155 degrees, but it looks absolutely perfect, so into the braising mixture it goes. Now I'm going to tightly wrap the pan with aluminum foil. Now this goes back into the Rectech, or you can finish it in your oven. Once it's foiled, it doesn't really make a difference. I've bumped the heat up to 325 degrees. I'm going to start checking for tenderness at 200 degrees. A chuck roast is a very tough cut of meat and very stubborn, and just because that temperature says 200 degrees does not mean it's tender. After braising for 2.5 hours, the temperature is at 200 degrees, and now I'm going to start checking for tenderness. Now simply take a fork and start poking and pulling around. Now see how there's resistance when I'm trying to pull? I can immediately tell this is not even close to being tender. And now I'm going to rewrap in foil and come back every 30 minutes and check for tenderness. Now let's give it a check after braising for 3 hours. And we're making some progress. It's getting a little tender in spots, but you can still see there's resistance. When there's little to no resistance at all, that's when the roast is done. So I'm going to wrap it back in foil and let it go for 30 more minutes. And now after braising for 3.5 hours, I think the chuck roast has finally given up. Now watch how easily the fork goes in and just pulls the meat right apart. That's when you can tell it's done. And now simply continue shredding the meat until it's all shredded and discard any big pieces of fat. And don't forget, if you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. Also, if you're not subscribed, hit that subscribe button and come back every Tuesday and Thursday for new cooking videos. Once all the meat is pulled, I'm going to put it back into the Rectech uncovered for 30 minutes, just until the liquid reduces a little. And here's the finished pepper stout beef, and there's many different ways you can eat it. You can eat it over rice, over pasta, you can eat it by the handful if you like. I won't judge you, it's your pepper stout beef, eat it how you like it. But personally, I like to eat it on a fresh baked roll with horseradish, mayonnaise, and pepper jack cheese.
Today I'm making the ultimate egg slut sandwich, 2 different ways. Now that's a pretty odd name for a sandwich, so it's gotta be good, right? Well, egg slut is actually the name of a handful of restaurants on the West Coast, and this sandwich happens to be its namesake. So the sandwich is not the dirty girl with the bad reputation we once thought it was. I'll be here all week, ladies and gentlemen. The bad humor must go on. In the meantime, let's make this very simple, delicious, and filling sandwich. Let's start by making the very complicated and time-consuming sriracha mayonnaise. In a small bowl, combine mayonnaise, and sriracha, and the amount of sriracha you use is totally up to you. If you want it spicier, add more. If you want it not so spicy, add less. And then give it a good mix until it's well blended. Now wrap it in plastic wrap and place it into the refrigerator until you're ready to serve. And now for the green onion topping. I have a bunch of green onions that I'm going to cut the green parts into about 3-inch pieces. If you'd like a full printable copy of this recipe with a full list of ingredients and easy to follow directions, visit thewolfpit.com. Now squeeze all the green onions together lengthwise and julienne them as thin as you can. Or Marianne them, I don't care. Just do whatever you got to do to cut them real thin. Now take the green onions and put them in a bowl of ice water. That'll keep the onions nice and bright and fresh. It was also supposed to help the onions curl. I obviously bought the non-curling onions because mine didn't curl. Like I said at the start of the video, we're going to make these ultimate egg slut sandwiches 2 different ways. The first way is with Spam. Until very recently, I didn't like Spam whatsoever. But somehow, I've accidentally acquired a taste for Spam. I'm still not ready to say I love Spam, but I do think it gets a bad rap. I think a lot of people think Spam has the same ingredients as potted meat, from the rooter to the tutor. And if you don't immediately understand what from the rooter to the tutor means, think of the anatomy of a pig. It's basically an old country saying, meaning nothing is wasted from the pig. But there's actually only 2 specific cuts of pork in Spam. Pork shoulder and ham, 2 very common pieces of pork that we eat often. There you go, Hormel. I just defended your product. Now show me the money. Now back to the Spam. You can cut it as thick or as thin as you like. I'm going to cut it fairly thin. Now fry the Spam in a skillet over medium heat. And of course use your finger to see if the pan is hot, like a true genius. Now see, somebody else is going to do this and then burn their finger and sue the pan company for not having a pop-up timer to let them know the pan is hot. Unfortunately, there's a lot of people with that mentality and they will sue anybody for their own stupidity. And now for the disclaimer so I don't get sued. Don't touch the pan. It's hot. Now fry the Spam over medium heat for 45 minutes or until nice and golden brown and crispy. Once it's golden brown, flip it over and let it go for another 3 to 4 minutes until the other side is nice and golden brown and crispy. Now remove the Spam and set aside. Now let's prepare the second choice of meat for the egg slut sandwich. Pork loin. An egg slut brines their pork loin. I just bought enhanced pork. Since it's basically already brined for you, it saves a step. Now dust the pork chops in cornstarch that's been lightly salted. There I go, touching and tapping my meat again. I thought I was cured. I guess I need to go back to Meat Tappers and Touchers Anonymous. Egg slut deep fries their pork chops. I just pan fried mine in a little bit of vegetable oil. There was no sense in using a bunch of oil just for 4 pork chops. Now let these fry for 4 to 5 minutes. I have a really big issue. I cannot keep my hands off my meat. And then give them a flip and let them go for another 3 to 4 minutes or until they reach an internal temperature of between 140 and 145. And like I said in a previous video, if you're leery of pink pork and you want your pork chops cooked well done, go ahead and ruin them and cook them to 160 degrees. And I'm definitely not trying to be a food snob, I'm just trying to give you the best advice I can to give you moist and tender pork. Now remove the pork and drain it on a wire rack so the crust remains crispy. Now for the bread, we're using Hawaiian sweet rolls. And when I say rolls, I mean rolls. There's 4 per sandwich. And just slice them in half. And if you've never had Hawaiian sweet rolls, hit that pause button, go to the store right now, and get a pack. They're awesome. Now toast them in a dry pan for 45 seconds to a minute. And I already know what you're thinking. Why didn't he put butter in the pan? Egg Slut specifically says they don't like to use butter when toasting the rolls. And I definitely agree with that, because the rolls are already nice and rich and buttery as they are. Now we're finally going to add some butter to the pan, because you need eggs for an egg slut sandwich. Otherwise, it's just a slut sandwich. Even with me with my sick mind, that just sounds wrong on every level and doesn't sound appetizing. Now add 2 large fresh eggs. And they even have a certain way to cook the eggs, and it's called marbling. It's where you take your spatula, break the yolk, and swirl it into the white. I obviously did it wrong, because my eggs didn't look like marbles. Now sprinkle fresh chives on top of the eggs and let them continue cooking without flipping until they're cooked through. Now remove the eggs and let's finally put this sandwich together. I never thought a simple egg sandwich would turn into the longest video I've ever made. Now let's lather a very generous amount of our homemade, very complicated sriracha mayonnaise onto our Hawaiian sweet rolls. Then add 2 pieces of Spam to one set of sweet rolls. And the fried pork loin to the other. The fried eggs. The julienned green onions. And finally the top layer of the Hawaiian sweet rolls that have also been slathered with the sriracha mayonnaise. And there you have it, the ultimate egg slut sandwich. This is one slut your mother wouldn't mind you bringing home. All jokes aside, this sandwich seems and is ridiculously simple. But all those flavors worked magic together, and it shows you don't have to spend a lot of money or be fancy to make delicious food. The Hawaiian sweet rolls really complemented the salty Spam and pork. The green onions and chives added a nice crunch and freshness. The sriracha mayonnaise added a little spice and richness along with the fried eggs. Now I can understand why they call this the ultimate egg slut sandwich. Absolutely delicious. Even if you're turned off by the name, give it a try. You'll love it.
Today we're going to make one of my favorite styles of barbecue that I grew up on. Eastern North Carolina chopped barbecue pork with a vinegar pepper sauce. So let's get started. Here I have a 6.5 pound Boston butt, untrimmed, and I'm not going to trim any of the fat, and I'm going to season it very liberally with just salt and pepper, and that's it. The grill dome is filled to the rim with lump charcoal. Now I'm going to take my hand torch and light just the center for about 30 seconds. Hickory wood is what's usually used in Carolina style barbecue, but I'm going to use apple wood today. I'm going to spread out about 10 chunks throughout the coals, and that way they'll burn throughout the cook rather than all at once. Now I'm going to insert my indirect cooking rack, the ceramic heat deflector that I've wrapped in foil for easy cleanup, and on top of that I'm going to place an old aluminum pan to catch the fat as it renders, and finally our main cooking grate. Now I'm going to put our pork butt on, fat side down. I do it fat side down because that gives more exposure on the meat side and gives you more bark, and more bark equals more flavor. Now I'm going to put our remote thermometer probe on, and now the remote meat probe. Put this in the thickest part of the butt and make sure it is not touching the bone. Tuck all your wires in. That way you don't get them pinched when you close the lid. Now I'm going to open the top vent and the bottom vent 100% until we get to 250 degrees. Once we hit 250 degrees, I'm going to shut the bottom vent down about 90%, along with the top vent. Initially, you may have a temperature drop or a temperature spike. Leave your vents alone at this point and your grill will stabilize around 250 degrees. Do it this way and you'll have an effortless cook. Don't try to shoot for an exact temperature. Your temperatures are going to fluctuate just a little bit throughout the cook, up and down. Just let the grill do its thing from this point on. Now just sit back with a cold beverage or two and enjoy the beautiful day. Now you can't have Eastern Carolina barbecue without a vinegar pepper sauce. So let's start off with some apple cider vinegar. Add a little bit of water. Some black pepper. Salt. Brown sugar. Red pepper flakes. And cayenne pepper. Get the lid on tight and give it a good shake. And that's all there is to it. After just over 11 hours, the grill dome held steady the whole time between 245 and 260, and our pork is done. So let's get this wrapped up in some foil. Now I'm going to wrap it up in a clean towel and put it in a dry cooler and go watch my daughter's softball game. When I come back 2 to 3 hours from now, it'll still be piping hot and ready to pull. Alright, I'm back from the game, and it's been right at about 3 hours. Let's go ahead and get this unwrapped, pulled, and chopped. It's amazing how hot that stays. It's still too hot to touch. Now just get 2 forks and start pulling. Now just take a knife, or preferably a cleaver, and chop the meat up until it's real fine. Just like that. And here's the bark. This is where all the flavor's at. Nice and spicy and crunchy. Just pull that apart, chop it up along with the meat. It'll add some nice texture. Once all the pork is chopped, pour on our vinegar pepper sauce. Pour as much or as little as you like. The more you add, the more flavor and spice it'll have. Get your hands in here and just get it all mixed together. Now the pork is ready to serve. And there you go. Eastern North Carolina chopped barbecue pork sandwiches with vinegar pepper sauce and of course coleslaw. It doesn't get much better than this. Moist and tender, spicy, smoky, tangy, absolutely delicious.
What does this look like to you? It looks like a bunch of big burnt pieces of meat, doesn't it? Well, if you've ever been to Maryland, specifically the Baltimore area, you'll know what this is. If not, it just looks like burnt meat to you. Well, if you don't know what it is, it's the famous Baltimore pit beef. There's pit beef places all around Baltimore, and I think I've been to most of them. Some are good, some are not so good, some are better than others, and some are simply the best. But I think the most famous and popular one is Chap's Pit Beef. So now you're asking, what is pit beef? Well, pit beef is a whole bottom round beef roast, which if you're unfamiliar with a bottom round beef roast, they're super lean and somewhat flavorful, but if they're not cooked right and cut right, it'll be like chewing on your shoe. Some places season their pit beef
and some places don't season their pit beef. Either way, it's cooked on an open hardwood fire, leaving a nice dry char on the outside and a rare medium rare in the middle. And then it's sliced paper thin, piled high on a Kaiser roll with paper thin slices of white onions, and either freshly grated horseradish or horseradish sauce, also known as tiger sauce, and or barbecue sauce. So let's get started and make some Baltimore-style pit beef my way, which technically isn't really pit beef, but if you're like me, you're going to like it as much or better than the authentic Baltimore-style pit beef. One of the problems making real traditional pit beef at home is a whole bottom round roast weighs between 28 and 32 pounds, which isn't really practical for most people. So today, I'm going to show you how to make something that's very similar to pit beef, but technically is not pit beef, with a smaller beef roast and cooked differently. Any type of round roast will work for pit beef. A bottom round roast, a top round roast, or eye of round, which is what I'm going to use today and which I use more often than not. I like it because it's still a whole roast and not a piece of a roast, and most importantly, it's dirt cheap. But almost all types of round roast are dirt cheap anyway, so when you're making pit beef or faux pit beef like I am, it's going to be cheap no matter which way you go. This is a whole 6-pound eye of round that only costs right around $20, but for that $20, you can make a whole lot of pit beef sandwiches. And there's little to no waste on any round roast. Any cut of beef round is going to be extremely lean with no internal marbling. I love fat and I'll eat fat on its own, and I think it's very necessary to keep the meat moist and flavorful, so I don't trim off any of the fat. If you don't care for a lot of fat, then you can trim it if you like. It's just not going to have much flavor. Like I said, some places season their pit beef with their secret mixture or seasoned salt, and some places don't season at all. I like to use a generous amount of kosher salt and black pepper. And you'll see in just a second, when I say a generous amount of pepper, I mean a generous amount of pepper, whether it was intentional or not.
Oh my god!
Well, that's not good.
Oh my
Sorry, that'll be a blooper.
Larry!
Brush it off and we'll get it. It's alright.
Oh my, yeah, sorry.
It's alright. Just brush it off.
Oops.
When stuff like that happens, you just gotta laugh at yourself. Once that side of the roast is liberally seasoned, flip it over and repeat the same process. Just use the SS pepper on the pan. There's plenty of it. Once all sides of the roast are liberally seasoned, put it into the fridge and let's get our grill preheated. And here's where it's technically not pit beef. Pit beef is cooked over direct hardwood fire, which is what gives it the nice black char, which personally, I don't care for a whole lot. I think it's dry and flavorless, and if you do season your roast, it burns all the seasoning off. So I like to simply cook it indirect, and in the end, I think it turns out as good, or maybe even better than pit beef. So I'm using my Yoder YS640 today, which I could cook this roast over an open fire on, but we're just going to cook it over indirect heat at 250 degrees until it reaches an internal temperature of between 125 degrees and 130 degrees. So preheat your grill or smoker to 250 degrees, which on the Yoder, it's as easy as pushing a couple buttons. Now close the lid and let that preheat for 15 to 20 minutes. Once the Yoder is settled in at 250 degrees and it's burning clean, it's time to add the eye of round. You can also see I have a meat probe in the thickest part of the eye of round. This is definitely something you don't want to overcook, because in my opinion, if it's slightly overcooked, it's ruined. We also had some other goodies on the Yoder today, like moink balls, which if you didn't know, they're bacon wrapped meatballs, and a 3-pound chub of beef bologna. I will have a video coming up on the moink balls, but I didn't do one for the bologna. If you want to see a video of smoked bologna, hit that like button and let me know in the comments. Now once the eye of round is settled in nicely, close the lid and let it smoke for 2.5 to 3 hours. After 2 hours and 15 minutes, it was looking good, but it was only at 117 degrees, so it was almost done. So we closed the lid and let it go for a bit longer. After cooking over indirect heat for 2 hours and 45 minutes, our eye of round is done. Now loosely tin it with foil and let it rest for about 30 minutes. While the eye of round was resting, we sliced up some white onion, paper thin, which will give our pit beef sandwich a nice sweet bite. After resting for 30 minutes, our eye round is ready to slice. I don't mean to toot my own horn, but does that look good or what? Look at how perfectly that's cooked, end to end medium rare, with no overcooked gray ring like you normally see with pit beef. And I think the juices in the platter speak for themselves. Now you can slice this with a knife, but I highly recommend buying a slicer, even if it's a cheap slicer you only use for pit beef. Like I said before, eye round is super lean and can be really tough, but if you slice it paper thin like this, it's like butter. And this is another reason why I like using the eye round, is you get whole nice round pieces that fit perfectly on a Kaiser roll, and not little strands of meat. Does that look beautiful or what? Now continue slicing until all of your eye round is sliced. And just be careful you don't take too many test bites, because you may end up being full before you have time to make your sandwich. Now while the slicer was still out, and before we made our sandwiches, we sliced up the bologna. And if you've never had smoked bologna, you don't know what you're missing. This turned out amazing. So once all the bologna was sliced up, it was time to make our pit beef sandwich. Now you can add as much or as little beef as you like, but if there's not a mountain of meat on there, it's not enough. Is that a beautiful sight right there or what? Now after you have your desired amount of pit beef on there, add your paper thin sliced white onion, followed by some horseradish sauce, which in this case is equal part prepared horseradish and mayonnaise. You can add as much or as little horseradish sauce as you like, but when you bite into it, if it doesn't take your breath away, you didn't add enough. Then give it a nice squish. And then for the purpose of the video, we cut it in half. Is that a thing of beauty or what? The meat was smoky, super tender, super juicy, complemented by the thinly sliced white onion and the horseradish sauce. It was absolutely amazing. And like I said before, it's as good or better than traditional pit beef. It's really inexpensive and really easy to make, and I really hope you guys give it a try.
Today I'm making tavern sandwiches, which are also known as loose meat sandwiches. I'm making them two different ways, one after its namesake, Ye Old Tavern in Sioux City, Iowa, hence the name Tavern Sandwich, and the other sandwich will be made the Made Right way, which is also a restaurant in Iowa, where they are simply called loose meat sandwiches. These are really easy to make and inexpensive to make, and no, they are not sloppy joes. So let's get started. Now these are going to be done my way, not the exact way Ye Old Tavern or Made Right makes them, but similar. In a skillet over medium-high heat, I'm going to brown 7822 ground beef. I'm not sure what kind of ground beef Ye Old Tavern and Made Right used, but these are very basic sandwiches, and I wanted to pack as much flavor into them as I could. Like you've heard me say before, fat equals flavor. Lean ground beef, it's horrid, it's dry, and it has no flavor. If you want something lean, eat a carrot. Once all the ground beef is browned, I drained half the grease and left the other half in for flavor and moisture. Then add diced yellow onion and saute for 2 to 3 minutes. Now the Ye Old Tavern sandwiches stopped right here. All what they were was unseasoned ground beef and sauteed onions. The rest of the ingredients I'm getting ready to add are for the Made Right version. After sauteing for a couple minutes, the onions become translucent. Now add water, apple cider vinegar, Worcestershire sauce, soy sauce, brown sugar, and a beef bouillon cube. Give it all a good mix and bring it up to a simmer. If you'd like a full printable copy of this recipe and many more, visit thewolfpit.com. When you print any recipe on thewolfpit.com, you'll get a free 1-year subscription to the Wolf Pit channel on YouTube. Now reduce the heat to medium-low, cover, and let it simmer for an hour. Of course it is. That's the lid that came with the skillet. After simmering for an hour, remove the lid and give it a mix. Now you could reduce the liquid and eat it right now, but I'm going to let it simmer for another hour so the ground beef will get that silky smooth texture. After simmering for 2 hours, the ground beef is done. Now let it simmer with the lid off for about 5 minutes or until the liquid reduces by half. And now it's time to eat. I'm going to put a scoop of the unseasoned ground beef and sauteed onions on the bun on the left. That's going to be the Ye Olde Tavern sandwich. And now a scoop of the seasoned ground beef on the bun on the right for the made right way. Alright, I gotta be honest, both sandwiches are made with the seasoned made right ground beef. I forgot to take a scoop of the unseasoned ground beef out before I added all the other ingredients. Now you could get a made right sandwich made with or without cheese. The one with cheese is called a cheese right. So I guess technically, I'm making a cheese right, right? I told you not to be stupid, you moron! Shut up, sit down! Shut up, sit down! Hey now! What the? Anyways, you can also put pickles, mustard, and ketchup on it, which I did. The pickles, mustard, and ketchup were also optional on the unseasoned Ye Olde Tavern sandwich. Now add the top bun and we're ready to take a bite. I've heard 2 different stories about the buns. Some say they were toasted, some say they were steamed. I just took mine out of the bag. Ain't nobody got time for that. Now give the bun a good smashing to try to hold everything together. I want to eat the sandwich, not wear it. Yeah, that's right. Don't laugh at me. Only cool people like me eat their sandwiches upside down. Would you look at that? It's magic. It's right side up again. Alright, it's time to be serious. Both sandwiches were very good. If I had to pick a favorite, I would pick the Ye Olde Tavern sandwich. I actually really enjoyed the simplicity of it. You really were able to taste the beef and the onions. And don't get me wrong, the made right loose meat sandwich was really good too. It just tasted more like a hamburger with the condiments on it. Now if you took the condiments off and ate it plain like the Ye Olde Tavern sandwich, then the made right would come out on top because the ground beef is actually seasoned. Either way, I think Wimpy would be more than happy to pay you tomorrow for both of these tavern sandwiches today.
Today I'm making Mexican-inspired grilled pork tenderloin sliders with an apple chipotle coleslaw. These are absolutely amazing and easy to make. Now let's get started with making the coleslaw. I'm going to need 3 chipotle peppers and adobo sauce, and you can find these in the international aisle in your grocery store. And chipotle peppers are simply smoked jalapeno peppers. I found that 3 peppers was perfect for this slaw, but if you like it extra spicy, add a couple more. And now you simply want to chop these up real fine. And now add them to a large mixing bowl, along with chopped up Fuji apple, a little bit of salt, fresh cilantro, ground cumin, and mayonnaise. Now give that a good mix to get everything well combined. And for a full printable copy of this recipe and many more, visit the Wolf Pit blog. And now I'm going to add 1 bag of the pre-chopped coleslaw mix. You can chop your own if you like. And now give it a good mix. And if it doesn't look nice and creamy, that's okay. Cover it up, put it into the refrigerator for a couple hours, mix it up again, and it'll be nice and creamy. And now for the rub for the tenderloin. I'm going to start with oregano, granulated garlic, granulated onion, black pepper, chili powder, cumin, and kosher salt. Give it a good mix. I have 2 pork tenderloins, just over a pound apiece, that I'm going to drizzle with oil. And now very liberally season all sides with the rub. Now these go into the refrigerator for 1 to 2 hours to marinate. Once it's done marinating, take it out of the fridge and let it sit on the counter for at least 30 minutes to come up to room temperature. I have the grill dome preheated to 400 degrees and set up for direct cooking.
Now I'm going to grill these for about 5 to 6 minutes per side, or until it reaches an internal temperature of 135 degrees. And if medium rare or pink pork bothers you, go ahead and cook it to 145 degrees. Give them a half turn at the halfway mark to give them the nice hash marks. After 2.5 to 3 minutes, give them a flip. Now let them go for 2 to 3 more minutes until they reach 135 degrees. Once you take them off the grill, loosely tint with aluminum foil and let them rest for 10 minutes before slicing. Now slice the pork as thin or as thick as you like. It doesn't really matter with this cut because it's going to be extremely tender no matter how you cut it. And like I said before, if pink pork bothers you, go ahead and cook it a little bit longer until it reaches 145 degrees. And now let's load up the pork on our sliders. And once you think you have enough pork on the sandwich, go ahead and add another piece. And now top these off with the apple chipotle coleslaw. And there you have it. Mexican-inspired grilled pork tenderloin with an apple chipotle coleslaw. These little sandwiches were absolutely amazing.
Do you ever get tired of the same old smoky barbecue pulled pork sandwich with the same old creamy coleslaw and your same old favorite barbecue sauce? But I asked myself that question first, and I replied back to myself. I know that if you reply back to yourself, that's a sign you're crazy. But my psychiatrist said as long as I take my medicine, I'm not crazy. But I replied back to myself, no, I don't ever, and I will never, get tired of the same old delicious smoky barbecue pulled pork sandwich with the same old delicious creamy coleslaw and my same old favorite barbecue sauce. I, for one, can't get tired of eating something that's already perfect. But then I started talking to myself again. I said, self, why not put a spin on the typical barbecue pulled pork sandwich with coleslaw and barbecue sauce and do a fusion with another one of my favorite foods, Chinese food. I already know what some of you are thinking. Even on my meds, I'm crazy. But please, just stick with me to the end. And if you still think I'm crazy at the end, then I guess I need to be committed. So that's right, today I'm making a Chinese-style pulled pork sandwich with a sesame ginger coleslaw topped off with a honey hoisin barbecue sauce. If you like pulled pork and you like Chinese food, you'll definitely want to give this recipe a try. It's not only delicious, but it's real easy to do. One thing I haven't mentioned yet is we're going to make pulled pork in only 6 hours, which is roughly half the time it usually takes to make pulled pork. So let's get started. Here I have an unenhanced 9-pound pork shoulder, also known as a Boston butt. If you want to find out more about enhanced meats, click on the link in the top right-hand corner. If you can't find a pork shoulder or a Boston butt, you can use another part of the shoulder called the pork picnic, or you can use country-style ribs, which are almost all the time pork shoulder, just cut up into smaller pieces. But pay attention when you're buying your meat. Lately I've seen pork loin cut up and labeled as country-style ribs. You'll want to shy away from these. I think pork loin is too lean for this type of cook. We very generously season the pork with Simply Asia's sweet ginger garlic seasoning, but straight out of the bottle, this stuff is delicious. Once the shoulder was completely seasoned, it went into the refrigerator for an hour or so. Now if you want to, you can leave it in overnight. While the pork is chilling in the fridge, let's get the grill lit and ready. For today's cook, I'm using my Gorilla Grill's Kong Kamado. But any charcoal grill or gas grill will work just fine as long as you can set it up for indirect cooking. I have the Kong loaded up with Rockwood's premium all-natural hardwood lump charcoal. When lighting my charcoal, I like to use my hand torch and light a small area right in the center. You can use any method of lighting you like, except lighter fluid. That's definitely a no-no in a ceramic cooker. Using the hand torch is what works best for me. You use what works best for you, the people. Once there's a small spot of charcoal lit, leave the lid open and the bottom vent open 100% for about 10 minutes or so. After 10 minutes, add your choice of smoke wood. Today I'm using 4 small chunks of apple wood. Then add your heat deflector, which sets the grill up for indirect cooking. And then of course add your grill grates. You can't cook without them. Well, actually you can, but that's a different video. Then close the lid with the top and bottom vent open 100%. This cook is going to be a high heat cook, and I'm going to be cooking in the 300 to 350 degree range. So once the temperatures reach between 250 and 275 degrees, close the top vent 2/3, leaving about a 1/2 inch opening, and the bottom vent open 3/4 of an inch to an inch. I'm trying to control the temperatures on the way up, rather than overshoot my target temperature. And we can't do an outdoor cooking video without Bella the Wonder Dog making her appearance. The temperatures continue to climb, and after about 30 minutes, the Kong had settled in right at 325 degrees. And I didn't have to make any further adjustments to the vents for the entire cook. So once the Kong was up to temperature and settled in, it was time to add the meat. And I know, this looks unusual for me. I'm cooking the meat in a pan, but you'll see why in a few minutes. Now close the lid and let the Kong do its thing between 300 and 350 degrees for 2 to 3 hours. I'm not really looking for a lot of bark. I just want to add a wee bit of smoke flavor. After 3 hours, the pork had some decent color, and it definitely had enough smoke for what I was doing today. Now I'm adding some chicken stock mixed with Shaoxing Chinese cooking wine and a little sesame oil. That'll be the base to our braising liquid. Next we're adding aromatics and spice with star anise, cinnamon sticks, and dried Sing Sing Chinese peppers. The final ingredients are the tops and bottoms of green onions, slices of fresh ginger, and some homegrown store-bought fresh organic garlic, right out of the jar. Spread everything out into the liquid and cover with heavy-duty aluminum foil. Now close the Kong up and let it continue to cook between 300 degrees and 350 degrees until it's tender. After braising for 3 hours, our pork is just about ready, with an internal temperature right at 200 degrees. After 7 months, my $12 ThermoPro Instant Read Thermometer is still going strong and accurate. I'll continue to update this thermometer as I use it. It was getting late and the family was really hungry, so the pork only got about a 30-minute rest. When I opened up the aluminum foil, the aroma coming out of the pan was incredible. It made me want to start taking bites out of the air, but my neighbors already look at me funny and think I'm weird, so maybe that's not a good idea. After 30 minutes, it was time to pull some pork. But first, you need to remove the ginger, the star anise, and the cinnamon sticks. Once everything inedible was removed from the braising liquid, it was time to give the pork a good forking. Now there's no reason to be gentle. You fork the pork like you own it. Even for the short time it was unfoiled, it did form a small smoke ring. While forking the pork, we had to take a few obligatory quality taste tests, and they definitely passed. But the pork needed just a touch more of the sweet ginger garlic rub. We didn't need to add very much. So you, the people, add as much or as little as your taste buds desire. Then give it all another good mix. Nobody in my house really eats the whole peppers besides me, so I enjoyed a few while I was taking a couple more test bites. Now it's ready to make a sandwich. I'm just using a simple sesame seed bun, but a better bun will definitely be used in the future. Now you add as much or as little meat as you like on your choice of bread, or as much or as little as you like onto your plate. Look at how moist and succulent this pork is. Now with pulled pork or a pulled pork sandwich, I must have slaw. But a traditional creamy coleslaw wouldn't work well with these flavors.
So we got a bag of the multicolored coleslaw mix and tossed it with Newman's Own sesame ginger salad dressing, and then let it sit in the fridge for a few hours. And let me tell you, this slaw was amazing. Now you add as much or as little as you like to your sandwich, or on the side if you like. Now this sandwich was already packed with flavor and it didn't really need any sauce, but I wanted some anyway. So I quickly made up a 2-ingredient Chinese style barbecue sauce, which was simply equal parts hoisin sauce and honey. Top off the sandwich and it was ready to eat. Now Courtney and I usually try the same food in the video as we film. Well, she changed the rules on this one. Because once she took the first bite, she shook her head at me and said, "Nope, I'm not sharing this one." So off camera, I made my own sandwich, which was identical to the one she stole in the video. Once I was finally able to take my first bite, I immediately understood her unwillingness to share. I'm one of those people who says, if it ain't broke, don't try to fix it. And that's something I would normally say about a pulled pork sandwich. But making this Chinese-inspired pulled pork sandwich wasn't an attempt to make something that's already great better. It was an attempt at simply making something totally different, but served the same way. And I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but I believe I successfully made something very familiar, yet very different, and of course, very delicious. Again, not tooting my own horn. The pork itself was succulent, aromatic, with a slight spiciness. The slaw was a genius delicious addition, but I definitely cannot take credit for that. The slaw was 100% Courtney's idea. The hoisin honey barbecue sauce added a nice pungent, salty sweetness to the sandwich. If I haven't already made it clear, this sandwich was simply amazing.
Today I'm making pepper stout beef, one of my favorites. Fall apart, spicy, tender, and very delicious pulled beef. Normally I do this on the grill, but today I'm doing it in the crock pot. So let's get started. I'm going to start by very liberally seasoning both sides of a boneless chuck roast with kosher salt and black pepper. You can use any kind of chuck roast you like, bone in or boneless, just make sure it's a chuck, that way you'll have the fat you need and the flavor. And now I'm going to add a little vegetable oil to a preheated cast iron pan over medium-high heat. And yes, it is a sad looking cast iron pan in need of a good seasoning. And now I'm going to sear the chuck roast on both sides. Normally when this is done on the grill, it's smoked at 250 degrees with a little smoked wood for a little extra flavor until it reaches 165 degrees. But we're doing it in the crock pot today, so we're changing up the way we do things. Now after 5 minutes, it's got a little bit of color to it, so I'm going to flip it over for another 5 minutes. If you want to skip the searing process and put the roast directly into the crock pot, you can do that. But by searing it, you're adding a little bit of caramelization to the outside, which adds flavor. Once the roast has been seared on both sides, I've added it to the crock pot, and now I'm going to add a little green bell pepper along with a little red bell pepper just for a little added color. You can use all green or all red, it's up to you. And now I'm going to add some rough chopped fresh garlic cloves, rough chopped red onion, some pickled jalapenos. Usually I use fresh, but this is all I had. Worcestershire sauce, and finally the ingredient that brings this dish together, a bottle of Guinness Extra Stout. And now set the crock pot on low and let it go for 6 to 8 hours until the chuck roast is fork tender. And here we are after the 6-hour mark. Everything's cooking down nicely. And as you could tell, the chuck roast is tender, but it's not yet fork tender. So I'm going to let it go for about another hour. After 7.5 hours, our chuck roast is exactly where we want it. Look at how nice and tender this is. Now I like to eat the pepper stout beef on sandwiches, but you can certainly put it over noodles or rice. What I have here is a 50-50 mix of Roquefort blue cheese and mayonnaise. And if you don't like blue cheese, horseradish and Swiss cheese are equally as good. And there you have it. Pepper stout beef on a ciabatta roll with Roquefort blue cheese and a little extra au jus for dipping.